The term new criticism can be a bit confusing for the new learners because the term new itself sometimes implies what is current or contemporary. But it was new when the criticism came, not now. Now it is almost 100 years old. If you read the criticism books, there seems to be a difference between certain authors as to who is the main person in the new criticism, while most books credit I.A. Richards to be the originator of the movement, followed by Eliot. Some other books do the reverse, but both are true actually. There were contemporaries, Eliot and Richards, and incidentally, there was another person who helped the movement gain momentum to a great extent, who is often left out by the books because he is not officially known as a new critic. That is F.R. Lewis. But so far as Lewis's energies are mainly directed to reading of individual texts mainly, he was also a new critic. So that puts me back to the track of explaining the core content of new criticism. New criticism is, in one sentence or in one word, is what they call close reading of literary texts, mainly poems, but it can be applied by extension to any text. That is, when you are reading a poem or a novel, you should focus on the novel or the poem or the play itself, not its literary context, historical context, social context, its author's background, etc., etc., which are done by theoretical reading. Well, it is true that when new criticism came, theory as such was not born, but even then there are modes of readings which used to have certain kind of backgrounds against which literary texts were judged. The two main approaches were then the biographical approach, reading an author's life and ideals, ideology, and relating his works to that. Or there was this historical criticism, judging literary texts, against the background of the historical incidents of the period. Both the trends are current till now, in at least in general forms of reading and in a very sophisticated way in theoretical readings also. But the new critics said or they felt that in talking or reading so much about the backgrounds, the texts themselves were not given much importance. So it is time we focused on the texts themselves. Then their backgrounds or whatsoever. So there were two books by I.A. Richards. One is The Principles of Literary Criticism, published in 1924, and then Practical Criticism, published in 1929. But also Tradition and the Individual Talent, the essay by Eliot that I have discussed in another lecture, published in 1920. So all these are contemporaries. So in that book, if you remember, in that essay, Eliot said that sincere criticism is directed not upon the poet, but upon the poetry, not upon the creator, but upon the creation. So you forget who is the poet or who is the writer and see what is being written. The text is the thing in a way for new critics. So like the play is the thing in Hamlet, it is said, wherein I shall catch the conscience of the king, though that is against new criticism. They don't want to catch the conscience of the authors. And parallelly, two ideas also were generated, intentional fallacy and affective fallacy, that also contributed to the growth of new criticism. The meaning of intentional fallacy is that you cannot judge a text by thinking about or trying to know about what the author may have intended, because you don't know the author. Even if you know, the author may not tell you what he actually had in mind. He or she, or most authors may have been dead. So it is fallacious to try to read author's intentions from the text, or no author's intention from other texts or other sources, and try to see how it is reflected there. So that is a fallacy. And correspondingly, affective fallacy is judging a text by its effects on the authors. Anyway, that is slightly different. So all this, Eliot, and then this uh, Clint Brooks, then I.A. Richards, and then Wimsatt. These people, what they try to focus on in different ways is that you must read the text, and not about the historical background and all. That on the first. So practical criticism then becomes a study in language, is not it so? So is not it so is a favorite phrase of one of my teachers. So is not it so? Neocriticism is basically a study in language, not again the linguistic study of language, but the study of poetic language. Yes, they believe that more or less that the language of poetry is different from ordinary language. So they are much like the neoclassics and unlike the romantics. So in principle, they believe, like the formalists, that literature or poetry is basically indirect statement. If you say things as directly as you say in day-to-day life, that will not be poetry. So ways of expression matter, and all those figures of speeches, irony, metaphor, simile, all these things matter a lot to new critics. So there is a book by, by Clint Brooks, Irony as a Principle of Structure, and then William Emerson's Seven Types of Ambiguity. So these are some of the important works. So you are busy with the text, that is close reading. However, later there was this theoretical turn like structuralism and post-structuralism, which are also textual readings, especially post-structuralism. Not so much structuralism, because they from the text try to find some structures, underlying structure, or correlate the text to already existing structure. So more appropriate, it's not like new criticism actually, but more appropriately post-structuralism. As Derrida said, there is nothing outside the text. So in a way, we can call the post-structuralists the culmination of neocritics and formalists. Neocriticism was an American formation and formalism was a Russian thing. Both are more or less similar, but the thing is, formalists are a bit too theoretical, more theoretical, and they are in a way, the founding fathers of structuralism, and the new critics are not that theoretical. Their theories are still understandable, like tradition and the individual talent. And secondly, so far as the corpus is concerned, formalists generally focused on the novels. In Russia, we call it Russian formalism also. And new critics, which is primarily American, they focused on poems. So this is a Russian and American difference. I do not know whether this is related or unrelated to the prolonged Cold War we had between America and Russia. So that is also a kind of difference that may have emerged from their respective likings of poems and novels. Anyway, it's a joke. So I think you have understood that what neocriticism is, more or less. So I.A. Richards, what he used to do is to type out certain poems and give it in the class to his students and ask them to evaluate it. Write a response to the poem. So he saw that when he gave the name of the poets, they wrote something of a very general kind, as I said in another video. If you know in your exam that critical appreciation is given and the name of the poet, Wordsworth or Yeats, is given, half of your answer will be on Wordsworth as a nature poet, etc. Is not it? Because you know all these things which may not have any relation to the poem. But if you don't know the poet, then you will try to focus on the text itself and bring out more meaning from within the text itself. So that is more or less new criticism. Thank you.